Please join me in prayer. Holy Father, may I never take for granted the honor, privilege, gift, and responsibility of being at your altar or stepping into your pulpit. May we be an instrument for your word, your purpose, and your love. Amen. You know, every time I get to stand up here and either read scripture or lead with prayers or help with Eucharist, I'm grateful to be able to look out at your faces. These faces of people who have made such a significant difference in my life. I look at you and I think of all that you have done for me, and I think of all you have done for other people. I could go down this aisle and pick out individuals throughout this congregation who have done so much for me and have done so much for so many other people. Now, I'm not going to do that this morning. Most of you want to take kind of a back seat and don't want to be the center of attention. But know that what you do is seen by God and is seen by someone like me who gets to benefit from who you are. And I will always be grateful. Of course, as most of you know, when I retired, I didn't expect to become a deacon. I didn't expect discernment, and I didn't expect to go through postulancy. But God has a lot of surprises. And what better place to do this than with people who are mentors like you are, mentors who follow me on this journey and help me understand what ministry is truly about. I will always be grateful. Now, many of you know that Father Dave and I share a little bit of a similar background. Both of us are lawyers, and you still let us come into this place. So that's speaks a great deal about your hospitality. Once again, God surprised me, though, because he didn't lead me into a law firm, as Dave has been able to do so proudly and has done so well. He led me to be a director of admissions at seminary and at law schools. 25 years, God led me to do that work, which I found to be ministry. And it was wonderful helping people try to figure out what the right direction might be for their future. I was dean of admissions for 25 years. And what does a dean of admissions actually do? Well, I counsel a lot of students on whether they should go to law school or seminary or whether they shouldn't. Also, what I did, I also helped make decisions as to whether a student got into school or didn't get into school. These are big decisions for them, and they were big decisions for me. And I wanted to make sure that I never lost the gravity of what that meant for individuals and what that meant for the people they would work with. It's interesting that deans of admissions are often called gatekeepers. What does that mean? It means that whether it's in a school of education, whether it's a school of theater, whether it's a school of music, business school, law school, seminary, we're the ones that get to decide who comes in, but we're also some of those people who get to decide who the future leaders of this world are going to be. It's a remarkable requirement and a remarkable responsibility. And the gravity of the ability for a gatekeeper to make a decision for the future of the world is remarkable work. And I never want to lose sight of how important that was. And thank God I wasn't the only one that had to make that decision. There were many others who helped to make those decisions. But it's interesting that we hear about gatekeeper this morning. So let's talk about this morning's Gospel of John. As you heard, John talks about gates and shepherds. But before we get into John 10, it's important for you to realize that we walked into the middle of one of Jesus' conversations. We need to look at chapter 9 to figure out what was going on in chapter 10. So let's take a brief look at chapter 9, if you will. Now, this is a story that most of you are very familiar with. It's about a man who was blind from birth. The disciples and the Pharisees were convinced that this man either had sinned or his parents had sinned to make him blind. Now, Jesus said, this man wasn't blind because he sinned or his parents sinned. Jesus went just straight to help this man without everything else that the other people were talking about. You remember Jesus spit on the ground, he made some mud and wrapped it and wiped it on the eyes of this blind man. Then he said, "Go and wash off this holy mud in the pool of Siloam." After washing this holy mud from his eyes, this blind man returned with full sight. You know, some people wouldn't even believe that this was really that blind man that they had seen before. Of course, the Pharisees complained that if Jesus really helped this man, he did it on the Sabbath, so he did it wrong. Here was this Jesus, again, trying to mess with their world. The Pharisees threw this blind man out of the synagogue, clearly a sinner. So much for hospitality, right? When Jesus heard that they had thrown him out of the synagogue, he actually went and looked for this blind man. Jesus still wanted to help him out. He was no longer physically blind, but he still wanted to help him out. He asked the blind man if he believed in the Son of Man. Once the blind man realized that this was actually the man who physically cured him of his blindness, he believed. He was no longer blind, physically or spiritually. Sadly, the Pharisees were not willing to be healed and chose to continue in their spiritual blindness. Now we come to John 10, today's gospel, where Jesus tries to explain to the crowd what had just happened. As we heard in the reading, Jesus used the metaphor of a shepherd and a flock of sheep. He talked about the character of both the shepherd and the sheep. The shepherd comes to the sheep in plain sight through the gate, and the sheep know their shepherd. They follow him because they know his voice. In fact, the shepherd calls the sheep by their name. He knows them, and they know him. Jesus also talks about thieves and bandits who try to get to the sheep by avoiding the gate so they can capture the sheep for their own purposes. The sheep run from these voices. They run from these bandits. The thieves do not know the sheep, and the sheep do not know them. These are voices of strangers. Did the sheep story help the crowd understand? Well, apparently saw that the disciples and the people were having trouble with the symbolism. So Jesus stopped using metaphors and parables, right? No. Jesus plowed ahead with more explanations about sheep. Jesus told them, "I am the gate for the sheep." He explained that thieves and bandits had come to the sheep in the past, but the sheep did not listen to them. They tried to steal, kill, and destroy the sheep. Jesus said, "I am the gate, and whoever comes to me will have life, and will have abundant life. Whoever comes through me will be saved, and who will be able to come, they will be able to see even greater pasture." Okay, now they got it, right? Well, after Jesus continued to talk more in later verses about the good shepherd who lays down his life for his sheep and who will bring in other sheep who do not belong to this fold, many in the crowd claimed Jesus was out of his mind or he had a demon. Still others argued, how could one with a demon heal a man who was blind? One thing was clear. Some in the crowd were willing to hear Jesus' words and continue to follow him and listen to him and learn. Others refused to consider anything that would mess around with their world that they were comfortable with. The world they controlled was just fine with them. So where does this leave us? Let me suggest a couple of ideas. First of all, think of the world that was surrounding the crowd this day. Yes, we know Pharisees were there. Now, Pharisees almost always get a bad rap. But remember, there were exceptions. Nicodemus was a Pharisee, and Nicodemus sought out Jesus and asked great questions of Jesus. However, many Pharisees were hypocritical. and they would do anything to hold on to their status and to their power. Many even made money off the demands that were required of the people for religious observance. Look what they did to the blind man. They kicked him out of the synagogue because he didn't fit in. He didn't fit in their world. Then there was the power of Rome. These people were surrounded by the power of Rome. Rome gave them great security and safety if they played by Rome's rules. Remember that 80% of those in the Roman world were destitute, were poor. They were needy people. Rome was fine with them as long as they could take advantage of them. Sounds like selfish thieves and bandits to me. This crowd was surrounded by overwhelming powers. Jesus spoke in the shadow of this domineering religious, economic, political power and forced discipline. Does this sound anything like today's world? We're surrounded by promises of false security and feel-good motivations. Advertisers and politicians, Facebook and TikTok know us well. Easy answers to difficult problems seem to get us by until the same problems crop up again, asking for just another Band-Aid. These voices sound good until they don't seem to work and we search for other voices. Or we continue to be attracted to the same voices because they know how to get our attention again. They love our attention. So what voices are you listening to? You see, Jesus used metaphors and parables because it was impossible to completely understand God, who is bigger than anything or anyone we can understand. He's God. He's creator. We are the created. I guarantee you that God needs to be bigger for me than anything I've met in this human flesh. You see, Jesus told stories that would explain a bit, but would cause listeners to keep stretching to understand something and someone big enough to truly save us from anything the world can throw at us. So what's Jesus telling us today? What can we understand? He is the one who knows each of us by name. He loves us, whether in the world's opinion we are prime stock or the runt of the litter. He is the gate for protection. He's not the gatekeeper like the admissions officers I was talking about before. You see, these students have to earn their way in, and if they don't earn their way in, they don't get in. We could never earn our way in. Salvation is a free gift, a gift of grace. All we have to do is say yes. And as our gate, Jesus also offers us unlimited pasture. He will lead us even to greater pastures. He came to love. He came to give life, an abundant life. How do we know this? We're Easter people. The disciples were confused because they didn't know what life was going to look like for them after the death and resurrection of Jesus. Disciples hid, they ran, they left Jesus alone to die. But look what happened after Jesus' death and resurrection. They couldn't stop talking about Jesus. Most of them died because they wouldn't stop talking about Jesus. Oh, what a change. We too are people of resurrection, and we have a story to tell. We have healing to change and to share. We have abundant life to share. The risen Christ, our good shepherd, calls us and knows us by our name. He knows you by your name. While all of us do our best to run away from him from time to time, he never runs away from us. He saves us, he protects us, he stretches us. He came to offer us abundant life that exceeds anything this world is ever going to offer us. So you want a better life? Here it is. So, whose voice are you listening to?